Miraidon, like vanilla coffee, is even better than I initially thought. In fact, unlike myself without a shirt, Miraidon looks amazing. Now that I've got a chuckle out of at least one of you, let's talk about the stats and why Miraidon looks so good. It has a base 100 HP, 85 attack, 100 defense, 135 special attack, 115 special defense, and 135 speed. Now, as far as Miraidon's stats go, the only two stats that I actually remembered was its base 135 speed and 135 special attack. For some reason, I thought its defense was 20 points lower and its HP was maybe a 90, but I am very pleased to see that it is base 100 in both the HP and the defense, especially since Miraidon also gets access to Calm Mind as well as choice items, specifically choice specs and choice scarves, which is going to make it go very, very fast or hit very, very hard. It's an electric dragon type, which means we resist some pretty common typings here. We resist fire, we resist steel, we have a quad resistance to electric, which is nice. We resist water, which is going to be very handy since Kyogre is going to be a thing. Now, our weakness to ground and dragon are going to be a little bit precarious because we do have to watch out for Groudon and its Precipice Blades, and we have to watch out for the multitude of restricted Dragon-type legendary Pokemon, especially a mirror matchup between Miraidons, or even if we run into a Koradon, we will have to be careful with Dragon-type super effective attacks coming our way. So when you're considering your Terra options, you might want to consider maybe running Terra Steel, Terra Dragon, or not Terra Dragon, sorry, Terra Fairy, Terra Dragon. If you want to go overboard on Dragon-type stab, you could definitely do that. Don't get me wrong, that is good. But from a defensive standpoint, you might want to run Terra Steel or Terra Fairy to resist Dragon-type attacks. And plus, if you do run Terra Steel, you are becoming resistant to Ice, which is another type that you are weak against. So that could be relatively nice at the end of the day. As far as Miraidon's ability goes, it has Hadron Engine. This signature ability to Miraidon summons the electric terrain and also gives Miraidon a third of power extra to its special attack, which is going to be wonderful. So that base 135 special attack is going to be doing a little bit more damage at the end of the day, so long as the electric terrain is active. So the first thing I was thinking about for building around Miraidon is a choice item. And we can use either a choice specs to boost up our special attack, or we could use a choice scarf to boost up our speed. The fact that we have base 135 in both of those stats is incredible, because 135, regardless of what the stat is a respectable number right there. And on top of that, if you have a non-beneficial nature with maximum investment, you hit 187 points. And if you do have a beneficial nature, you're going to hit 205. Right now, as far as the EVs go on this Miraidon, I have 187 for the special attack and 205 for the speed. Now, the nice thing here too is Miraidon is also going to have that built-in Life Orb modifier with the Hadron Engine, so long as electric terrain is active. And on top of that, electric terrain also boosts up the power of electric type attacks for any Pokemon that is grounded on the terrain. So basically, so long as you're not a flying type Pokemon, your electric type attacks are going to also gain a 30% boost. And on top of that, Miraidon's signature attack, Electro Drift, is a base 100 power special electric type move that also gets a third in power boosted on top of super effective hits, which means this is essentially the anti-Kyogre button right here. If that Kyogre does not terrestrialize away from the water type, we are deleting it, which is going to be wonderful. And one thing is going to be very, very important to make note of, though, is Miraidon will appreciate having speed boosts with either drops into the opponents or Tailwind support if we're not running a choice scarf. So the fact too that we are naturally setting electric terrain means that the Violet Paradox Pokemon will have their Quark Drives activated, meaning they don't necessarily have to run the booster energy anymore, you could run items such as the Focus Sash for Iron Bundle or even Iron Jugulus. You could still have the Assault Vest on Iron Hands, which Iron Hands naturally ran anyways, but now Iron Hands gets the benefit of having an attack boost from its Quark Drive, so that's going to be really nice. And then don't even get me started on the Swords of Justice Paradox Mons. They're going to greatly benefit from having their Quark Drives activated. Iron Crown is going to be terrifying at this point, now that I'm thinking about it, but anyways, let's get back to Miraidon. Regardless of whether we're running Specs or Scarf, some solid options here that we could run for some moves are Draco Meteor, Dazzling Gleam, and then Volt Switch. Draco Meteor is a great stab dragon option here. It's base 130 power, and while you do take a -2 special attack drop, you could easily make the hard switch for Miraidon out, especially too if your opponent does bring in, say, Indeedee or Rillaboom and resets your terrain. Subbing out Miraidon is not the end of the world there, because you can then preserve your electric terrain and bring it back in later. And plus, you can always clear that special attack drop if you do have the Draco Meteor. Dazzling Gleam is a nice spread option as well. It's a fairy type attack, which means we are going to hit a lot of dragons for super effective damage, especially a non-terrestrialized Koraidon, since it is 4 times weak to fairy with its fighting dragon typing. And then we have Volt Switch here for a nice pivoting option, especially if we're running a Choice Scarf set. We could go for the Volt Switch, potentially break a Focus Sash and switch out. Great. Now, an alternative to Volt Switch as well is U-Turn. U-Turn, while being a physical attack, has the nice advantage of the fact that it's not an electric type move and it's not useless against ground type Pokemon. Maybe you run into a Tinglu, maybe you run into a Groudon, maybe you just have that bad matchup for Miraidon. You go for the U-turn, you get a little bit of chip damage into the opponent, and you safely switch it out. And then that way, maybe you could pivot into a Landorus Therian or an Incineroar, get an Intimidate drop, especially if you ran into a Groudon. That could be very, very handy at the end of the day. Now, alternatively too, Miraidon does get a few other coverage options that could be pretty handy as well, as opposed to, say, Dazzling Gleam or Draco Meteor. It does get access to Overheat, so there's some nice fire type damage to hit Calyrex Ice Rider for super effective damage. Solgaleo, Duskmane, Necrozma, they all don't appreciate an Overheat coming off of Miraidon. You could also run Power Gem, which, while it doesn't have any secondary effects, that is a nice means of hitting Ice types for super effective damage if you don't want to double up on, say, Draco Meteor and Overheat and then having these special attack drops. You do have that Power Gem there, so you do have a little bit of super effective Rock type damage to hit Ice type Pokemon with, so that could be relatively nice. And plus, if you don't want to run the Draco Meteor, you could alternatively run Dragon Pulse while being weaker in power. It does have the nice added effect of not lowering your special attack 2 stages each time you click it. So if you are down a couple of Pokemon and you can't switch out, Draco Meteor does become a little bit of a liability on a choiced item set at that point. So that's something to consider. You could also run Flash Cannon, which is some nice steel type coverage options right there. You can hit rock type Pokemon for super effective damage. You could also hit the ice types for some super effective damage while also having a slight chance of lowering their special defense 1 stage. So you do have that as well as an alternative to potentially running Power Gem. So you could do some stuff like that. Now, as far as Miraidon's stats go too, if you want to reduce your speed a little bit to run some bulk, what you could do here is you could run, say, a Modest Nature. If you wanted to lower the EV investment as well, you can still hit 187 with considerably less EVs. So what you could do is you could still run that max speed, but now you just freed up about 132 EVs. You could put an extra point into your defense and then invest more into your HP. If you wanted to, you could have a little bit of bulk that way. You can throw up an Aurora Veil with an Alolan Ninetales if you wanted to. You could go for Prankster Screen support with Grimmsnarl. You could have a Booster Energy Screamtail go for screen support. And alternatively too, if you do have some Intimidate support in your back row, maybe say an Incineroar or a Landorus, that could help Miraidon live some hits as well. While base 100 defense and 100 HP is a nice combination, it's not necessarily the most fortified wall right there, so having a little bit of extra support to go the long way and help Miraidon stay on the field is going to be relatively handy. Now, let's move on to the second moveset idea that I was thinking of. So my second set here is a Calm Mind option. So what we could do as far as our held item goes is we could run a Life Orb to also benefit from having a little bit of extra damage output at the cost of a little bit of HP. Alternatively though, if we wanted to, we could run a Clear Amulet to protect Miraidon from having its stats lowered. Now, because Miraidon is a special attacker, we don't have to be worried about Intimidate. However, going into this format, I do have a sneaking suspicion that we might start seeing an uprise in the move Eerie Impulse. Eerie Impulse cuts the special attack 2 stages to the target, and Prankster Thunderous could become a potential way again of getting around Miraidon, so having that Clear Amulet could be relatively nice. And if we don't run into Eerie Impulse, we might run into either Icy Wind or Scary Face, so rather than potentially taking a speed drop with Miraidon, having that Clear Amulet protected could be really strong. And plus, one nice thing about the Clear Amulet is if you try to Parting Shot into something with the Clear Amulet, Parting Shot not only doesn't drop your stats, it also prevents the opponent from switching out. I ran into that with an Incineroar once. I don't remember what I was using the Clear Amulet on, but when the Incineroar tried to go for the Parting Shot, it just backfired and it didn't work. So that might be a nice option to consider for Miraidon. Now, Miraidon having access to Calm Mind is going to be relatively strong at the end of the day because we are boosting up our special attack and special defense. So if you wanted to go for a Calm Mind and pair that with, say, Electro Drift and then a coverage option, in this case I have Dazzling Gleam, but Dragon Pulse could work, Overheat could work, Power Gem could work. I don't really like the idea of Draco Meteor and Overheat, but they could still work. It's a little counterproductive because of the special attack drop, but the main point is, as you're boosting up that special attack, you're then therefore increasing your damage output, having access to Electro Drift and its super effective modifier, especially the bonus damage from getting that 33%. That is going to be wonderful for doing raw amounts of damage. As far as the EVs go, what I was thinking about is we could do 4 EVs into our special defense to round us up to 136. Since we have an even number there, we're going to get a little bit extra out of our special defense boost off of the Calm Mind. I have max speed investment here so that Miraidon can try to outpace a lot of things, especially with running Icy Wind support or Scary Face or Tailwind. Having a means of dropping the opponent's speed or boosting our own speed and being able to take advantage of that with Miraidon having max speed is going to be wonderful at the end of the day. As far as our special attack goes, this is a little bit of a weird area for me because I don't necessarily know if we need to go all the way with our special attack for investment since we are naturally boosting up with Calm Mind. But if you wanted to run max special attack investment, you could easily do that. I thought 180 is a relatively nice stopping point here since a 50% boost right there from a stage 1 special attack is going to be 90 points, which is going to put us up to 270, which that seems relatively safe for doing raw amounts of damage. But if we wanted to go for more damage, we could easily do that. So just with the remaining EVs, I just divvied it up to the HP and physical defense stat. So we have 28 points into both of those stats, which gives us 179 HP and 124 defense. Now, one thing to make note of too for Miraidon is Miraidon does get access to another coverage option on the electric side called Parabolic Charge. Now, what Parabolic Charge does is it's basically a slightly weaker Giga Drain for electric types, but the nice thing that separates it from Giga Drain is it hits everything on the field, which means you can potentially hit both of your opponents, and if you want to be a psychopath or not, you could hit your partner and potentially get up to 3 sources of HP back, which means if Miraidon gets set up, especially if it's behind screens, Miraidon could stay on the field considerably longer than your opponent might not necessarily expect it to, which could get relatively scary at the end of the day. So you could potentially run Parabolic Charge instead of Electro Drift as well, and run a different option. Maybe you run Dazzling Gleam, maybe you run Flash Cannon. Any of the moves that I mentioned as potential options for the choice set, you could run that next to Parabolic Charge instead of Electro Drift, which that gives Miraidon a nice little bit of flexibility, so it doesn't necessarily have to rely on Electro Drift for electric type coverage. And plus, if the electric terrain is still up on the field, Parabolic Charge is still going to get that bonus modifier from the electric terrain, and Hadron Engine will still give Miraidon that modifier to its special attack stat, which means the base 65 power right there is not necessarily going to stay at 65. It's going to get a lot stronger, a lot quicker. Now, another thing too, and depending on if you watched his video or not, Pokeburn put out a Miraidon video about 2 weeks ago from the time of when I filmed this video, and what he ran on his Miraidon was actually the Electric Seed. So basically, the Electric Seed would synergize with Miraidon's electric terrain and activate, therefore giving Miraidon a +1 boost to its defense stat, allowing it to get a little bit bulkier on the physical side as well, which I thought that was a pretty nice form of tech on it as well. And so I definitely think you could make a very strong case for the Electric Seed on Miraidon as well as an alternative held item to both the Life Orb and the Clear Amulet as well. Now let's get on to my third and final idea for Miraidon, and this is the spiciest one yet. Scope Lens Dragon Cheer. So this is where we're looking to cause the most amount of chaos, because we are going to give Miraidon the Scope Lens item. The Scope Lens here is going to raise the critical hit ratio of all of Miraidon's attacks 1 stage. So naturally all Pokemon are sitting at a stage 1 ratio, which means they have a rough percentage of 4 for landing a critical hit, and then once they get up to stage 2, they only have a 12.5% chance for landing critical hits. But where do we get the next 2 stages to hit the guaranteed critical hit? Well, we're going to get it thanks to Iron Jugulis with access to Dragon Cheer. So Dragon Cheer boosts the critical hit ratio of your allies 1 stage if they're not dragon types, but if they are dragon types, it's going to raise their crit modifier up by 2 stages, which means the Scope Lens and Miraidon are naturally going to hit a modifier of 4, which means all of Miraidon's attacks are therefore going to be guaranteed critical hits. Now you do have to be careful with Dragon Cheer, because if you Terrastallize away from the Dragon type before you go for the Dragon Cheer, you're only going to get that +1 modifier. Now, at a critical hit ratio of 3, you do still have a 50% chance of landing critical hits, but at the same time, getting that guaranteed critical hit is going to be incredibly handy, because the guaranteed critical hit modifier is going to ignore all of your attack drops and all of your opponent's defensive boosts, whether that's Reflect and Light Screen, or just naturally increasing the special defense stages with special defense boosting moves. And if you're a physical attacker, same would apply for physical defense. But because Miraidon's a special attacker, we don't care about physical defense. So anyways, case in point, it's going to ignore all of your drops and all of the boosts to your opponent's special defense for Miraidon, which means therefore we can now justify running both Draco Meteor and Overheat, which are both base 130 attacks. So that's going to be really, really nice. And we have Electro Drift here to do as much damage as possible, especially with that electric terrain on the field. If you wanted to, you could go for an offensive Terra with this one. You could go Terra Electric to double your electric type stab. You could run Terra Dragon to double your dragon type stab, or you could go Terra Fire to give Overheat stab in the first place. Now, one other thing that you could potentially do is you could run Terra Grass on the defensive side, and then that way you don't have to worry about Rage Powder redirecting your attacks away. And if you wanted to, you could take Overheat or Draco Meteor out and then maybe run Terra Blast. And if you want to run Terra Blast with Terra Grass, you now have a means of hitting Groudon for super effective damage with that Grass type Terra Blast. Now, alternatively too, you could run Terra Ice and you could have some little bit of fun there if you wanted to bring in an Alola Ninetales and go for Aurora Veil in a perfect world. You get your Dragon Cheer, Iron Jugulus goes down, Ninetales comes in, you get your Aurora Veil up, and now Miraidon is tanky and guaranteed to be deadly. Now, obviously, that's a little bit of wishful thinking on my end for the setup, but I think it could be really strong if you pull it off. So you could do that with the Spice right here, with that Scope Lens and Dragon Cheer synergy. So that's my main thoughts on some Miraidon spreads. Let's talk about a few Pokemon, especially some Violet Paradox Pokemon that I think are going to benefit for being on the same team as Miraidon to begin with. Starting off our list here for some strong potential teammates to join Miraidon in battle is going to be Iron Jugulus. Dragon Cheer shenanigans aside, having access to a Quark Drive that benefits Iron Jugulus' speed stat means we can afford to have a Focus Sash on it, which means we have a little bit of insurance to make sure that this thing doesn't get knocked out within a single turn. Iron Jugulus here does not have the greatest of bulk with 94 HP, 86 defense, and 80 special defense, so having that Focus Sash means it's going to become a little bit more disruptive while supporting your team. Having access to a speed boosting Quark Drive with max investment on a timid nature is going to put us up to 176 points naturally, and getting that 50% boost from the Quark Drive is going to put us up to 264 points, which is very respectable, which means we can have a very quick Tailwind, Snarl, or Taunt, or even if you are doing the Dragon Cheer shenanigans, you have access to a fast Dragon Cheer, which is going to definitely be guaranteed to outpace Miraidon, which means Miraidon will quickly get set up that way as well, which is going to be fun, and I might be potentially planning on running that in a battle video. But anyways, main point here is having access to a fast, reliable Tailwind means Miraidon is going to get a speed boost as well as the rest of the party, especially if you have to switch out Miraidon to deal with a potential counter that might lead into it. You have access to Snarl as well, which is some great chip damage while also lowering the special attack stage of the targets by 1 point, which means Calyrex Shadow Rider, Lunala, Necrozma Dawnwings, all of which are weak to dark type attacks, are going to get a little bit of extra damage as well as having their special attacks reduced by that 1 stage, which means you could make them a little bit more manageable, and plus being able to hit a Kyogre, Kyurem White, Palkia, Dialga, all of which are going to be great targets to hit with a Snarl as well. And plus Fluttermane is still going to be relatively prevalent, so being able to drop that thing's special attack is going to be very, very handy as well. Having access to a fast Taunt is going to be very nice because while it won't allow us to get ahead of prankster Pokemon before they go for status moves, it will allow us to hit non-prankster Pokemon with the Taunt and lock them out of status moves. A Booster Energy Screamtail's biggest weakness here, especially a screen support Screamtail like the ones that I like to use in my videos, its biggest weakness here is Taunt. So being able to nail that thing with a Taunt and shut it down is going to be relatively nice. And plus, if you taunt an Incineroar, you don't have to worry about Parting Shot, so that's going to be a nice thing as well. As far as our next Pokemon here, it's actually going to be Iron Bundle, and similarly to the Iron Jugulus, being able to run a Focus Sash on this thing is going to open up a couple of different pathways, because now we don't have to necessarily worry about relying on that boost energy to get a speed boost. With a max speed invested Iron Bundle, we hit 206 points with a Timid Nature. The booster energy would put us up to 309, and now thanks to Electric Terrain activating Quark Drive, we can run that Focus Sash. Iron Bundle does have a nice 114 defense stat, but its 56 HP and 60 special defense are definitely not doing it any favors. We can easily go for a boosted speed Icy Wind to lower our opponent's speed stats one stage. We could also have access to taunt, like I mentioned with the Iron Jugulus. But another fun thing that you could do with the Iron Bundle is you could go for the Encore. So if you potentially run into a prankster Pokemon that maybe goes for Tailwind or maybe a Fake Out user, you could go for that Encore and lock them into that move, and then that way they either have to switch out or stubbornly try to survive and wait out the Encore turns. So that could be a really nice thing with the Iron Bundle. You could go supportive with Icy Wind and Encore and Taunt, or you could just go offensive with a little bit of support from the Icy Wind. You could throw Hydro Pump on this thing, you could run Freeze Dry, Ice Beam, all of which could be nice options to run as well. So Iron Bundle is going to be a little bit trickier to predict, especially on the closed team sheet format with the ranked ladder. So now you're going to be wondering, is this a supportive Iron Bundle with a Focus Sash, or is this a raw offensive Iron Bundle with a Focus Sash? So that could mean Iron Bundle is going to get scarier. Now, our third Violet Paradox Mon is going to be Iron Moth. So back in Series 2, so Regulation B, when the Paradox Mons were first brought in, Booster Energy Iron Moth with a speed boosting Quark Drive was getting really scary paired next to Flutter Mane, because the Iron Moth would be EV'd to outpace the Flutter Mane, go for an Acid Spray into the target, lower their special defense 2 stages, and then this Choice Specs Flutter Mane would be coming in for the knockout with that boosted special attack stat with either a Moonblast, Shadow Ball, or Dazzling Gleam. Miraidon would definitely be very appreciative of its opponents having a special defense stat lowered by 2 stages. Now, like the first 2 of the Violet Paradox Mons that I mentioned, you could potentially run a Focus Sash on the Iron Moth if you wanted to. This thing does get access to Helping Hand, so you could boost up Miraidon's damage output as well by 50% with the Helping Hand. But if you didn't want to run a Focus Sash and you wanted to kind of play a more offensive Iron Moth, you could technically run an Assault Vest on this and get that 50% boost to your special defense. You have a base 110 special defense right out of the gate, so with max IVs and 0 points into your special defense, you're sitting at 130 with this sample idea for what I was thinking of for breaking down Iron Moth's EVs. We have the max speed, we have the 132 into our special attack to make sure that we're literally 1 point under our speed, and then 2 points into our special defense to hit 132. We're getting a 50% boost to that right there. So we're just sitting under 200 points into special defense, which means if we're not going up against physical Pokemon, this Iron Moth is going to be a specially defensive wall. Now the 60 base defense, that's not doing us any favors. But the nice thing here too is we could run, alternatively, we could run a Power Herb right here to have a move that would normally take 2 turns fire immediately, and we could slap a Meteor Beam on Iron Moth. This coming off of a speed boosted Iron Moth getting a guaranteed special attack boost and then firing a base 120 rock type attack is going to be very unappreciated by a lot of Pokemon. So you could potentially do that as well, as opposed to say a Focus Sash or a Assault Vest. Now, the next Pokemon here on the list is going to be Landorus, and this is going to be for Landorus Therian, which is going to be nice because we do have Intimidate support with the Landorus. You typically see a Choice Scarf run on Landorus, or a Choice Band, or even an Assault Vest. Now, the nice thing here is you could pivot Landorus in and out with U-turn, and then recycle your Intimidates, especially if you wanted to throw an Incineroar on the team with Landorus. You could have a nice switching dynamic between Landorus and Incineroar coming in and then constantly lowering the physical attack of each of the opponents. You could do something like that, but the nice thing here too, especially if you wanted to run the Parabolic Charge on Miraidon is Landorus being a ground type means it's going to be naturally immune, so it's going to have a nice defensive synergy where it doesn't take the parabolic charge, and then that way Miraidon hits both of the opponents, and then Landorus could go for some raw damage. We could run Rock Slide, you know, typical Landorus stuff. You could run Stomping Tantrum so that you don't have to worry about Earthquake potentially hitting Miraidon if you're locked into it. So you could have that, but Earthquake is still a nice option as well. You just have to be careful with Miraidon and just don't hit yourself by mistake. Like I mentioned, how Berm used the Parabolic Charge Miraidon in his video. He also had a Landorus Therian, so there you go. Another case in point why you should use Landorus Therian and get that usage back up, which is something I never thought I'd be saying in this format. But anyways, moving on, Chi-Yu could be a nice partner for Miraidon since Beads of Ruin naturally lower the special defense of everything on the field. Like how I mentioned the Acid Spray off of the Iron Moth, softening things up for Miraidon. Chi-Yu just having that just affect the entire field could be relatively nice at the end of the day, especially if you wanted to run a Choice Scarf and then go for some raw damage with either, say, Heat Wave or Dark Pulse. I mean, even a Snarl could be nice too, since Chi-Yu is lowering everything's special defense, so even having that Snarl as a little bit of a backup plan just to keep them in control while also doing a little bit of damage, that could be nice at the end of the day. And then finally, I was thinking Booster Energy Fluttermane could see some success next to Miraidon since it does have that nice Stab Fairy coverage right there with the Moonblast and the Dazzling Gleam. It gets access to Icy Wind, so if you wanted to run, say, maybe Fluttermane and Iron Bundle and Miraidon together, well, at least this way you do have a little bit of extra speed control that way. Also, I think I said finally going into Fluttermane, but I thought of one more that might be nice, and we're going to wrap it up with this, and that is going to be Mousehold. Mousehold will provide some nice redirection support with Follow Me. Follow Me is a lot more reliable than Rage Powder since grass types are immune to Rage Powder. So you could have Follow Me in conjunction with Mousehold's Friend Guard ability, which means the allies are going to receive only 75% of the damage from other Pokemon's attacks. So you could have that Follow Me and Friend Guard working in synergy to try to keep Miraidon nice and healthy. So that's what I was thinking there with Mousehold, and plus you do get access to both Thunder Wave and Super Fang. Thunder Wave is nice because it can land paralysis into the targets, which means they could potentially miss their turn, and Super Fang is guaranteed to cut the target's HP in half, which is going to be very nice for getting past some bulky Pokemon. Anyways, guys, that was my main ramble on Miraidon. It looks amazing, and I am excited to try this thing out. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments below, and let's get the conversation going.